So my name is Chanel Davis, and I'm with David Zucchino. He's a foreign correspondent for the Los Angeles Times. We're here at the University of North Carolina School of Journalism and Mass Communications. Today is Friday, October 19th, 2012 at 9:40 a.m. So I'd first like to start with, how did you originally get into the news business?
I was interested in reading in high school and some writing, although I never wrote for my high school paper, but I loved to read, and I read a lot of histories, a lot of journalism, and thought that might be something I'd like to do. One book that I really remember from high school was John Hersey's Hiroshima, which was about the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and he was the first reporter to get back there and interviewed people who had survived it and did a long reconstruction in the New Yorker that became a book. And I remember thinking that would be an interesting way to make a living, to do things like that. So that's how I got started. So when I came to Carolina, I immediately signed up for the journalism school.
And your dad was in the military.
Correct.
How did that, and you travel a lot for that, how did that influence you in your childhood?
We lived overseas. We lived 8 years in Germany and traveled through Europe when I was a child, and I was really fascinated by different cultures, different languages, meeting new people, seeing new things, and that sort of became ingrained in me. And it was just something I wanted to do, and I figured journalism was a good vehicle to get out in the world and have an excuse to talk to people, probe through things, meet other people. So it just sort of whetted my interest.
Yeah, and so that kind of led you to Carolina. And then you worked on the Daily Tar Heel, and you were the sports reporter. Were you initially interested in going into sports?
I love sports, and I played sports in high school and came up here and thought I would play for Carolina, and I played my freshman year for baseball, but I wasn't nearly good enough to make the team, so I said, I better find a new career, and I decided I'd like to write about sports. So I applied at the Daily Tar Heel and got a job as a sports writer. So that was my first writing experience, and I had no experience writing, so it was a tough, because I had taken some journalism courses but had just started. So it was a tough transition, but that's kind of how I learned to write, was covering sports.
Did those skills that you learned at the Daily Tar Heel and through the school, do you feel like that prepared you for your first job?
Oh, that helped a lot, because I knew nothing about writing and reporting before I got here. One of the lessons I really remember from Journalism 53, which I think is still here, the intro course on news writing, was, first of all, you had to be really accurate. You could not inject your own opinions. You had to cite the sources for your facts, and this is stuff I wasn't used to, I had no knowledge about. So that was drummed into me, and that really helped. And then working at the Tar Heel and having to write under pressure, quickly synthesize a lot of information, go out and talk to people, get quick quotes under deadline pressure was really a help, for a career, since I had no experience prior to that.
And then after graduation, you went on to the News and Observer as a general reporter. Tell me about that experience.
I was a sports reporter for the summer. I got an internship, but it was only for the summer, and I was supposed to leave in the fall because they had no other jobs. And luckily, a general assignment reporter on the city desk left to take another job, and so they had an opening. So I became a general assignment reporter, and I'd never covered news before. I'd only covered sports. So that was a pretty difficult transition. And I tended to get all the jobs when somebody was on vacation. I would have to rush in and fill in for them, or somebody called in sick. So I didn't have a beat. I covered everything. I mean, I covered the airport authority, county commissioners, city hall, police. They sent me out one time to something called the Tobacco Advisory Board somewhere in eastern North Carolina, where they were speaking in code, and I had no idea what they were talking about, and I had to go force myself to ask people there, like, what just happened here? They were talking about, crop set-asides and tobacco supports, and so that was they just sort of threw me in the pool, and I had to learn to swim. So, I would go to the county commissioners meeting and have no idea what the topic was, because usually I'd be sent at the last minute. They realized, we don't have anybody to cover the county commissioners. Can you run over there? So it was that kind of thing, which was great training.
What did you enjoy covering the most?
I liked doing feature stories in the eastern part of the state. As I stayed there longer, I sort of developed kind of a beat as a general assignment reporter, traveling around the state. Doing news, usually features off the news. Like if there was the drought, then I would go talk to farmers on the effects of the drought. That kind of thing. I do some military stuff down at Fort Bragg, and just pure features, just talking to people.
And then after, what was it, about 2 years there, you decided to move to the Detroit Free Pass. What caused you to make that change?
I got a job offer from somebody. It was one of those somebody knows somebody who had heard about me, and they had me up for an interview, so they offered me a job there. Again, it was a general assignment reporter, and I worked there for 2 years doing stuff around Detroit and in Michigan, and all kind of things. It wasn't a beat. I ended up covering everything.
What was the main differences between that and the NNO?
Bigger city, much bigger newspaper. I didn't have to quite cover as much. At the News Observer, I covered a lot because I would do sometimes several stories a day. At the Free Press, it was a little different. They had a much bigger staff, and I could take more time to do stories, so that was a nice luxury, having the time to do it.
Yeah. And then again, you decided to switch.
I went to the Philadelphia Inquirer. That was in 1980, many years ago.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And tell me about what was it like working there?
That was a paper I'd always wanted to work for. At that time, I thought it was the best place to work in the United States. They were really focused on enterprise reporting and telling deep and detailed long-form journalism. And back at that time, newspapers had lots of space and lots of money. There was no internet and no competition. It was really, really a rich newspaper in terms of resources. And I wanted to go there. I had been reading their stuff, and they had, over the years, a whole string of Pulitzers for these big, long projects, and I wanted to do that kind of stuff. So I'd really been trying to get there and finally got on and was happy to be there.
At this point in your career, can you describe what your writing style was?
I like to think that it sort of probed into situations, looked into sort of motivations of people and why they did things and trying to explain why things happened. I usually looked for stories that you could tell through an individual or through a place that would tell the larger story of some bigger event happening. And that drew my interest and was something I really wanted to do, and I was allowed to do that at Philadelphia because, again, this was even a bigger paper that had more resources and I could spend more time. Mm-hmm. Spend even a couple weeks, and in some cases longer, on a story. And as I stayed there longer, I got to do projects where you would spend months, doing a story or a series of stories, and that was really refreshing and rewarding.
What was your greatest, at that time, what was your greatest strength as a reporter?
I think being able to assimilate a lot of information, getting out and getting people to talk to me and trust me. I've generally interviewed people who had never been interviewed before. I didn't do public officials. I talked to ordinary people about their lives. And one thing I discovered is that everyone loves to talk about themselves. And if you express an interest, they're flattered. Well, the newspaper wants to talk to me, and they really will open up. And I didn't go in with like a set of, I knew what I wanted to ask them, but I didn't have a set of questions. I would just let them talk. And I discovered that people will reveal a lot more than they intended to.
Mm-hmm. And then in 1997, you wrote The Myths of a Welfare Queen.
Mm-hmm.
Did you pitch that story, or was that assigned to you?
At that time, I was covering the drug beat in North Philadelphia, and I'd spent a lot of time in some really poor areas and dangerous areas covering drug busts and drug dealers and the whole illegal drug trade. And as part of that, I ran into people who worked with anti-drug groups, church groups, social groups, and social workers, church people, who were working on the streets, trying to reduce drug violence, trying to help families, trying to keep kids safe, and got to know a lot of people. And I wrote one long story about a young man who was caught up in the drug trade, and I spent several weeks with him, following him around, talking to his parents and his brothers on how he got into the trade, and he was trying to get out. He kept getting arrested, and I would go to jail and talk to him, and then he would get out. So it was a whole long story, and a publisher saw that story and said, wow, we'd really like, some kind of book about the situation there. And after we talked a while, we thought, well, what about welfare? Because welfare at that time was a big issue. Bill Clinton he was president, had promised to end welfare as we know it. There was action in Congress. There was a lot of national discussion about welfare. So we decided we'd do a story on welfare mothers and welfare families, and I already had plenty of contacts, and eventually narrowed it down to one woman who I met through some of my contacts.